We all carry that medicine within us. We all have it. We have medicine for our own healing. We have medicine for the healing of others.
Hey all, welcome to the Medicine Stories podcast. It's me, Amber Magnolia Hill, and this is episode 21. Today I'm talking to botanical bruja Lola Venado. We talk about being the daughter of a secret witch and becoming a botanical bruja years after the mother passed and the chance to learn from her was gone. Racism, secrecy, lineage, and cultural evolution. Following the breadcrumbs to get a bigger picture of who your people were. There are more holes than solid information in all of our lineages. Letting your silvers shine. Not dyeing your hair, which is a choice that I am making and that Lola is having to unmake her previous choice to dye her hair. Locating yourself within the myths of your ancestors. Being empowered to heal yourself. Listening to the understory. Amplifying the voices of people of color within the worlds of herbalism, spirituality, and the creative arts. Comida es Medicina. White flour is no one's ancestral food. Most magic is mundane. When women's knowing and or calling out injustice are labeled irrational. Oh, makes me so angry. And what white folks are learning and dismantling right now. I want to share a story that's just been coming up for me lately. Different conversations with people and with podcast interviewees. And it's an ancestral story for me as well. So this story is about the Wrights, the WRIGHT side of my family, who I've talked about a number of times on the podcast, with Darla Antwine and with Kemi McBride and Laura Veleda Vesta. I shared this story of an ancestral dream I had in which the name Wright was literally on a scroll in my bones. And thinking about it, this side of my family, my father's mother's side, they really initiated me onto the ancestral path as well, my interest in them and my connection to them. And it's probably not too surprising because I was really close with my grandma until she passed 4 years ago this week. And I knew both of her parents as a kid. I was so lucky. I knew 4 of my great-grandparents as a kid. One of them, my only memory of her is basically as she was dying. But I know that she came to visit me when I was born, and I remember her face. I have a sense of her. The other 3 grandparents were all on my dad's side, and these 2, of course, were married, were a couple, and didn't die until I was maybe 7 or 8, my great-grandpa Wright. So, okay. But this story, let's flash forward about a decade after their deaths, and I'm in high school. I think it was my senior year, maybe even the summer after senior year, so 1999. And my sister, 2 years younger, Lacey, had gone out, and she was home late. She was out past curfew. And my mom worked swing shift at that time at Harrah's, dealing blackjack and roulette in South Lake Tahoe, where I grew up. And so she got off at 2. And so we were all up because there was like this extra energy of Lacey being late and mom getting home late and all that. And yeah, it probably was summertime. So Lacey finally came home. I don't remember when. She was late. She got in trouble somehow, but it wasn't a big scene. My parents weren't really like that. And what ended up happening was that the 4 of us sat in the living room talking until dawn. And it was really, really special. It was just like time outside of time, one of those moments. And, I'm thinking about it at that point in our lives. I was about to leave home. My parents divorced a few years later. We were all just living really separate lives. We didn't spend a lot of time together in one room. Mom was at work when it was dinner time, and they worked opposite shifts, so someone could always be home with us. And, we went and visited my grandparents, the grandma I'm talking about. a couple times a year, and we spent time together when we left Lake Tahoe. But other than that, not a lot of time was being spent together in the home like that. And it was just really special. And I'm so glad that night happened, because my dad told us two stories that night that I've never forgotten. And the second one, especially because it has more to do with him. But the first one I thought was interesting too to share. And that is about my dad's aunt, Jenny. So my grandma's younger sister, we called her Grandma Jenny. And Grandma Jenny was in 2 car accidents when she was a teenager, I think in the late 50s, early 60s. And she was paralyzed. She was in a wheelchair for the rest of her life, the whole time I knew her, of course. And she died when I was 10. And my dad told us the story that his mother had told him, which was the day after Jenny passed. My grandma got a call from one of Jenny's good friends, someone they had all grown up with. And, how are you doing, Inez? And my grandma said, oh, I'm pretty good, but I have to tell you that Jenny died yesterday. And this woman said, I know. And when my grandma asked her how she knew, she said, well, ever since my mom died, she visits me in dreams every now and then. And she visited me in a dream last night, and she was talking to me, and in the middle of her sentence, she stopped and said, Jenny's here, and then kept talking. And I had never heard a story like that before. Of course, I thought it was pretty cool, but I was especially struck by the fact that my dad was struck by it. He always just seemed like so linear and rational and logical, and, only what you can see with your senses is real. And I just was really amazed that he believed that story and that it stuck with him and that he shared it with us. And so then I was very surprised by the next story, although now looking back at who I know who he is more, I can see how this experience happened to him. And so this story has to do with his grandpa, my great grandpa. His name was Louis Zelgar Wright, Zelgar. And yeah, I think I was about 8 when he died. And so my dad was home that day. He was off work. Me and Lacey were probably at school, and my mom was out of the house too. And he knew that his grandpa, who he had been very close to, was near the end. And he said he just couldn't sit still, and he was just pacing the house and couldn't focus on watching the TV even. And he finally went outside and did a few laps around the house, and then came back in and sat down on his bed. And he said this wave of peace just washed over him in that moment. And he looked at the clock, because he is a very linear and logical person, and he always pays attention to dates and times. And he used to keep the most meticulous calendar, and he would write important dates on it and then rewrite them every year. Like the first day he never saw me, the first time when I was a baby and my mom took me to her mom's house for the day, he wrote Black Amber Sunday on the calendar. And then the first day that my mom took my little sister and me away to visit her mom for the day, he wrote Black Lacy Tuesday, because it was the first day he never saw us for the whole day. And he rewrote those every year on the calendar. So he's very kind of fixated on keeping time in that way. And so about a week after that experience, he was at his grandpa's funeral. I was there too, I remember it. And he was standing next to Grandma Jenny. This was a couple years before she died. She was in her wheelchair, and someone walked up to them, and they were talking, and somehow this person said something along the lines of, oh yeah, what day did your dad pass? And Jenny said, last Friday or whatever. And my dad said, at 3:23 p.m. And Jenny looked at him and said, how did you know that? That's what the death certificate says. And that was that moment of peace that he felt. And so, and I have to say, I've never heard stories like that from my dad since then. But what I have learned about him since then, because I've learned it about myself, is that he is a highly sensitive person, or an empath. And I think this has so much to do with why he's an alcoholic, a severe alcoholic. Because, his generation, and younger men now too, of course, just the way that we define masculinity in our culture, it's hard. It's hard to pick up on extra sensory information. for anyone in this culture, but especially for males. And I mean, alcohol is deeply embedded in his ancestry as well, his other line, his father's line. But I think that being so sensitive is part of why he drinks so much. And I think too, like, what if he hadn't? What if he never drank? What if he didn't go down this road of alcoholism? What if he'd made a different choice, or alcohol didn't exist or something? And those gifts had been cultivated in him, recognized by his culture. Like, what else would he have known? What other experiences would he have had? What sort of magic could we have shared together as father-daughter? And I mean, my sister's basically psychic. I don't really like to use that word. I don't know, have bad connotations with it, but she is also really, really picks up on things that I definitely don't pick up on, even though I am also a very highly sensitive person, and just kind of know things without knowing them. But I've never had the kind of experiences that my dad and my sister have. So I don't know. I just wanted to share that story. I just had it in my heart today, and I really wanted to speak it. So thank you. Thank you for listening. And thank you to my right ancestors who I do talk to and, I don't know, pray to, open the door of communication with quite frequently. So today, it just feels really good to have talked about them. This kind of ties into, in this interview with Lola, when I was re-listening to it, I noticed that I say like, oh, I don't like the word spiritual. I have a hard time with that word. And I wanted to kind of speak about why I have a hard time with that word. I'm sure a lot of you get it. It's kind of a charged and weighted word. But for me, it has a lot to do with where I live, which is in the Nevada City area of Northern California. And if you've been here or know of it, then you probably know exactly what I mean. It's like a super new age community. And not everyone, of course, not all of it is like that. There's also a really strong, like, conservative white faction of older folk here. But then there's a lot of just like young hippies, burners, and just new agey types. And I've just seen so much spiritual bullshit in this community and in like my larger online community as well. And it's really hard to use that word for me without thinking of how abused that concept can be by certain people who have not done any of the work, who are not truly tuned into themselves in any way, which to me, I guess, is kind of like the definition of being a spiritual person, is just knowing yourself deeply. That reminds me, actually, I have a quote written down here because I thought it was really relevant to the podcast. It just happens to be on this screen that's in front of me right now on my computer, and it's by Mr. Rogers, and he says, "You rarely have time for everything you want in this life. So you need to make choices, and hopefully your choices can come from a deep sense of who you are." And, I've said it before, I'll say it again. That's what I am trying to do with this podcast, is help my listeners, give them the encouragement, tell you that it is a worthwhile endeavor to figure out who you are in the depths of you. It's worth it to follow the mythic threads that call to your soul, to know who you are, Okay, so let's talk about the Patreon offering available to go with today's interview with Lola, and I will give you her bio coming up soon. It's a really beautiful, well done. It inspires me to learn how to do this kind of thing. PDF booklet called Comida es Medicina. And there are 5 recipes in here. And I can't wait to make the first one because I'm a big fan of beans. I love eating beans. I love all sorts of Mexican flavorings on beans as well. So on page 1, Lola writes, "Food is one of the most potent forms of medicine and magic we can craft for ourselves and others, offering a nourishing balm for body and soul. It builds community and fosters a deeper sense of self," there we are again, "when we connect with our ancestral foods. These recipes contain the foodstuffs from which my bones were built. from my ancestors to me, from me to you. So I want to say, and I say this in the interview, I didn't know we were going to get into food. And I didn't know that in the last interview with Cami either. And it's really interesting to me now that this is 4 interviews in a row that focus on food. And actually the next one does too, because I've already recorded it. And on ancestral food especially. And this is just a message I really needed to hear. And still need to keep hearing and reminding myself of. So these recipes real quick are slow cooker Mexican beans, easy pickled vegetables. Oh, the photo for that is gorgeous. Amaranth, cacao bites, yum. Atole de, I was going to read the English ones. Sorry, you guys. Amaranth and peanut atole. I even had to look up how to pronounce atole. And peanut milk and flour. These all look so good. Okay, so that is for patrons of the podcast at the $2 level, and it's available at medicinestories.com. No, patreon.com/medicinestories. And I wanted to remind you too, if you're already on Patreon or if you're not, but you think you want to be, that episode 19 guest, Darla Antwine, she has a coupon code that's available there also on Patreon for you to get, I believe it's 20% off. I don't have it in front of me, but I think it's 20% off ancestral healing session with her. And they're wonderful. Listen to that episode if you haven't yet. And then you could head over to patreon.com/medicine stories and scroll down to the post from June 26th, my sister's birthday, and you can get that coupon code, and it will work until August 31st. So since there's still lots of time on that, I wanted to mention it. And one last piece of business here is that we have updated the Mythic Medicinals shop online. Finally, there's still a few medicines that are still steeping and being made, but we now have St. John's wort oil available. And if you go to the website and it's sold out, because it might be in a couple days, it's going to be restocked again very, very soon, like within a few days of you listening to this probably. And the Queen of Heaven and Earth breast oil, which sold out so fast last year. So we made 3 times as much this year. It's made with rose petals, dandelion blossoms, and violet leaves. And this year I added pure organic rose essential oil just for the sensuous experience, the sensual experience of smelling roses as you rub this oil onto your breast tissue. Also works beautifully on the womb and belly tissue. And you can rub it anywhere. You know, it's just these plants are specific to those tissues and to dissolving hardnesses and blockages. But I think of it more as a ritual use, you know, especially as a breastfeeding mom. I love using this oil, and it's really just, I feel very happy with this addition of the rose essential oil. I never use essential oils in my medicine. You know, I do kind of vibe with Susan Weed's concept of essential oils as the white flower of herbalism, especially with the oils. You want to infuse whole plants into your carrier oil to get the full spectrum of medicine from them, not just the tiny little, you know, snippet of essential oil, which is just one small part of the whole plant medicine. But just having it in there for scent purposes, it truly is heavenly. It truly is divine. And I hope that you will use that oil, if you get some, to honor yourself and the amazing powers of the female body. We also made a surprise batch of extra potent elderberry elixir. We usually only do it in the fall and winter, but we've had some illness in our house and we wanted some for ourselves because we ran out really quickly. And so we made a whole batch, and those are listed right now. They always sell out quickly too, but as of this recording, there's still plenty left. So that's all at mythicmedicine.love. And okay, let me give you Lola's bio real quick. Born with river blood, magic bones, and a moonlit heart. I can attest to all that. That sounds just like her. Lola Venado is a botanical bruja, word forager, and gatherer of dinner parties and moon circles. An ally to the wild sacred, she honors ancestral ritual, folk medicine, and story magic. When she's not traveling in her van to pray at the altars of forest, river, and ocean, Lola is cultivating everyday magic in the river city of Sacramento. And I want to add to this, we talk about this at the end, that Lola has a wonderful podcast called the Branch and Bone Medicine Show. And you should listen to it. You should listen to us speak about it towards the end of this interview, because I love her vision behind it. I love what she has to say. And people are always asking in the Medicine Stories Facebook group for similar podcasts. And Lola's is a wonderful place to start if you're looking for something similar to what I'm doing here. So again, that's the Branch and Bone Medicine Show podcast, and she's specifically focusing on sharing the stories of people of color and others whose voices tend to go unheard. So without further ado, let's listen to this interview with Lola Venado. Hello, Lola. I'm so happy to have you today on the Medicine Stories podcast.
Hi, Amber. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So I was trying to remember how we met, and I think it was through Instagram.
I'm pretty sure. I think I want to credit Miss Mila because, well, okay. Let's start with Kit Dizzy. The shop there in Nevada City, because I was following them because I had discovered their shop a few years back when I was dating a guy who lived in Grass Valley, and he took me to Nevada City, and that was the first time I had been there. And I came across that shop and thought it was wonderful. And so then I started following them on Instagram, and there was an announcement made saying that Mila was going to be there. It was right around a Halloween, and she was doing tarot readings. And so I went, and I got a reading from Mila, and we got to meet, and that was how our relationship developed. And then I think it was through her Instagram that I found you, and we connected in that way too.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think that meeting in person was actually the first, and then the Instagram connection came later.
Yeah. So that's how that happened.
Yeah.
Thanks, Instagram.
Yeah. And Kit Izzy, which
yes.
Anyone who's ever visits Nevada City or Grass Valley, you gotta go in there.
Yeah. That's the one place I have to, stop into when I go there. So yeah, and now here we are.
Yeah. Okay. And then I went to a class that you did on smoke medicine when I was pregnant about a year after that. And I loved it. I mean, I just went because I was so attracted to your work and loved everything that you were putting out there on Instagram. But I kind of thought like, well, what more can I know about, lighting herbs on fire?
Right. Yeah.
But
pretty no-brainer, right?
But then you just taught me so much and so simply. And entering your home, it was truly like entering the home of a bruja. It was it was so magical. Lola, I still think about, I know you moved out of that space, but I'm sure your new space is the same.
Yes.
And I love those old Sacramento houses so much.
Yes. And I think a couple of the other Nevada City Grass Valley ladies joined. Cassandra, Sister Scorpio, and
my friend Kat McClintock.
Yeah. So a little Nevada City posse.
We all
rolling through Sacramento.
Yeah.
That was for my sacred smoke, class and gathering. I hate calling them classes or workshops, because that just kind of like implies that I'm the all-knowing teacher, and I really don't like referring to my stuff in that way. That they're offerings, they're gatherings, but people get a better idea when you label it as a workshop or a class, right? But yeah, that was a really lovely gathering. And yes, this new home that I'm in is no different. I do hear the same thing when people walk in. It's like, oh yeah, it looks exactly how I imagined your home would look. You know, this is clearly a botanical bruja lives here. Yes. Yeah.
Well, let's start with that term that you just used, and tell me about that term. Tell us about your plant path. You also said, maybe you can tie this in, that you've always known what you wanted to do since you were a young child. So what is your path plant? What has your plant path been like?
Okay, so botanical bruja is just a moniker that I began using just as a way of referencing my heritage. So just another way of saying like green witch, right? And so that's because that's where most of how I work within my magic and medicine is all related to plants. You know, be that, you know, we're talking, you know, the usual, what people think of, you know, like tinctures and, you know, and teas, or, you know, through food medicine, right? Food medicine and magic. So that's where my, you know, my path lies. And so not so much like others might work with divination, you know, tarot, you know, do a lot of, you know, candle magic, things like that. So that's why, you know, botanical bruja is, you know, my chosen identifier. And my plant path, well, it's interesting. So when I was a little girl, I always had like this, you know, kind of like connection with the plants and the outside. That was like the safe space, right? Because I was this like really quiet little girl, didn't like all of the, you know, loud noises and bright lights and all the commotion and everything. I didn't like attention, you know, being, you know, put upon me. And so now, of course, you know, we know, you know, you're a highly sensitive person and what that means. So back then it was just, you know, what's wrong with you? And, you know, I was a crybaby and, you know, all of these other things. So I would, you know, wander away, like when we had big family gatherings, and it just got too overwhelming for me, I would wander away and find like some quiet, like spot. And a lot of the gatherings that we had were at my family's house on a farm in Madera, California. And so all of my, you know, my cousins and my tias and I would just, you know, slip away and find somewhere to like totally focus in on a plant. And I didn't know what I was doing. You know, I was just like, here is this place where I can focus my energy and block out everything else. So that was one aspect of it. My mother, she was very much a bruja. So I grew up watching her do things with plant medicine. I never saw her in connection with plants in the way that I was when I was younger, like, you know, kind of like engaging in conversation, for lack of a better word. But, you know, creating medicines, potions, you know, in the kitchen. And so there was that element that, you know, added to that too. Now, I didn't know like what I wanted to do with that. And of course, as we get into, you know, like teenage years and all kinds of other things going on, all of that is kept put aside, right? And that's not really cultivated, you know, in most, you know, families or, you know, any kind of like social circles. And I didn't want to be different. I didn't want to be other. And so that connection and that medicine kind of was put on the back burner for a lot of years. So it was really, I mean, this is a common story, I know, of a lot of folks on the plant medicine path. It was a crisis of health that really kind of like brought me back, snapped me back very quickly, very deeply into, working with the plants. And so I guess I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do when I was young, but I just knew that it would be something not normal, I didn't know, specifically what that was going to look like exactly, but, I was always a very creative child, doing a lot of writing and photography, and food was always so important, to me. In one way or another, there's like almost all photos of me as a child, I have food in my mouth. It's, ridiculous. And I would put on little dinner parties, little tea parties, in my yard, and, East Side San Jose. And, here's this little girl, with all the little, ragamuffin kids. And I'm just creating this experience, a pop-up, Yeah. So that's really kind of, how that came to be.
What was your mother doing when she was engaging with plants and plant medicine?
So my mom, and now so her mother is still living. My mother passed away in 2000. So she died only at an age only 2 years older than I am right now. So she was very young. Mm-hmm. So like I said, if my grandma were to hear me talking about this, she would be very upset because she is still very indoctrinated and very old school Catholic. And, but my mother, she absolutely practiced. And, I was surrounded by all kinds of witchy stuff in our house and bookshelves full of just assorted different, esoteric books, which, I would pull down and read and comprehend, to some degree. So my mother, I think, didn't have so much a connection to the natural workings. So like, hands-on with the plants, so much as she was likely doing more like spell casting type of work. And I gained some more insight, a lot of insight about her and about what she did after she passed, because then people started to feel free to open up and share. So like my tias would tell me stories, and my dad, because they had divorced when I was very young. And so he finally started opening up and telling me more about her and things that, she did. And like she cast stones, he remembers her collecting black and white stones, very specific stones, and her asking him to create a deerskin pouch for her to hold these stones in. And she would cast stones and read them. So, it was a lot of these different kinds of things that I wasn't privy to. And I can understand why she didn't like reveal her whole self to me. It's tragic and it's a great loss, because I think there's so much that could have been, gained in doing that. But she's also coming from this place of where she didn't want to be other. And she suffered from, racism. She was the, part of this large Mexican family of farm workers. And this is a time where, that was really, you didn't want to be associated as that type of a person, right? And so you want to, integrate into, what's considered acceptable and normal. And that really carried through into her adulthood and into her parenting. And, even to the point of where I got, punished when I would begin speaking Spanish. So her also not wanting to, fully reveal her practice and whatever that looked like for her. I get it. So I would say actually that I have a much deeper understanding and a connection with my mother now than when she was alive. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you must think, as I often do about my dead mother, like, oh, I wish I could share this with her. I wish we could talk about this right now.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah. And, and that's what would that look like now if she were here with me, and here I am, immersed in, and still learning, because I'm still unlearning and learning. Right. And, so what would that look like if I had my mother, here? And it's a whole new day and age, right? If she were here, she would be completely free to be all of who she is and all of her, strangeness and her, her magic. And, so it absolutely is something that I think about a lot. And, it's a loss. But it also informs how I am with my son. Because no matter, he's 26, he's a grown adult. But even if he doesn't understand what I'm doing or what I'm sharing with him, or if he thinks I'm ridiculous, the point is he knows about it. Right. And that to me is very important because I don't want my son to discover who his mother was after I have passed. I want him to know me as I am here and now today, and hopefully try and inform him of why I did the things that I did, in the past, So these are all, conversations that I missed out on with my mother. So I really want to try and make sure that I have these conversations with my son now.
My most recent guest, Cammie McBride, the interview has not come out yet at the time we're speaking, but she said something about you never know what seed you plant in the mind of a child or someone else, even if they don't seem interested or like they're even listening at that time, will sprout later.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, and I see it in my son, and, and he likes to make fun of me, and he jokes, that I am, my mother's daughter. And he says, you tried for a lot of years, Mom. He says, but there's no getting away from it. This is who you are. And I tell him, I said, you just remember that, Apple. I'm the tree that you're, you are from. So, yeah. But, he's young, he's a man, so it's a whole different, experience for him. But I anticipate, there being some more willingness to receive what is within his bloodline, probably once he starts entering into his 30s, that's where things kind of start to, shift, I think. And I cannot wait to have grandchildren because, oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah. I just know. I know they're going to just be, they're going to be so me.
Totally. So. They're going to love going to grandma's house.
Yep. Oh my gosh. So, yeah.
Yeah. Cammie also talked about, before we had started recording, we were talking about our children. Her boy's 14 and my girl's almost 12, and how they just like roll their eyes at us. And, and then I think during the conversation, she said something about like, this is why I am teaching as many people as I can to change the culture so that then my teachings get reflected back to my child.
Right. That is so smart.
That's what I said. I was like,
yes. Yes. That's a good point. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I love it. Thanks,
Yeah.
Cami.
Yeah. It's interesting too that you and I both have lost our mothers, but have our maternal grandmothers still living. Yeah, I just feel so lucky to have that still in my life.
Yeah. Oh my God. Okay. So I just had a thought though. I had to, this is, this is how terrible I am. I forget how old I am, let alone, others. So my son is 27. He's not 26, as I said. So I lost a year there somewhere. But
yeah, that happens when we hit middle age. We stop. It's funny because actually, as you were saying that, I was trying to remember how old my grandma is, and I was like, she's 98, and I was like, oh no, she's 96. Yeah.
yeah. My grandmother is 85. She just turned 85. So yeah, she is still very, very vibrant, very opinionated, and very questioning. And, I have a lot of questions of her. And every time she sees me, I think she feels like, oh my God, what's she going to ask me this time? And, she starts to kind of bristle up a little bit around, certain, things that I'm asking about the family. And she isn't really, that responsive, and so when she does start to kind of like open up about something, I just let her kind of riff, and I don't interject and I don't try and lead. And so I, can kind of glean some family history, in that way. But she was like when I got my DNA test results last year, and I had some questions around that that I posed to her, and specifically none of my results were a surprise, right? For the most part, it pretty much just kind of like indicated that both sides of my family knew what they were talking about. Great. Okay. We're from where you say we are from. But there was a segment of area in Mexico, kind of the Chiapas area, south eastern, Mexico, that kind of surprised me because I didn't ever hear anything about our family, being from that area of Mexico. It was always, from, we're primarily from the northern area of, Mexico, Sonora, Chihuahua, those areas. And so I asked her, I said, Grandma, do you know about this, the Mayan, history of your family, the bloodline, was your grandmother, your great grandmother? And I don't know, mija. We never talked about these things and we never asked. So she pretty much kind of like shut me down. And so the only information I can, kind of like piece together from that is from one of my aunts who says that she saw a picture of my grandmother's grandmother. And so she was a short, very dark Indian woman with long black braids. And, so that is very different from the other part of our family within, Mexico that are of the Yaqui, lineage, because they're, taller folks and they had a very different look to them. So that tells me that is where that comes from, that Mayan ancestry, comes from, my grandmother's, family line, as opposed to my grandfather's, her husband, and his family ties. So, but it's been interesting, piecing together, following the breadcrumbs, to kind of like get a picture of your people and yourself in turn, right?
Yeah. What test did you do that was so specific about the geographic location within Mexico?
I chose to use family tree DNA, and I chose them because of their privacy policy. Because it was very, it gave you more choice, and it was very different than, like ancestry.com or, any of the other ones. And so that's why I chose that one. Because, something I think that, I don't hear people talk about with, their DNA testing, discovering, doing their ancestral, work to discover their family history, is that, there may sometimes be folks like me who don't necessarily feel it's safe to get into that, and who it might bring out of the woodwork, so to speak, because, that can open up a lot of, it can open up a lot of things. And when there's not necessarily the most savory of folks on either side of the family, sometimes that might just be best left alone. It's kind of like, what are you willing to give up in exchange for this knowledge? And I just haven't gotten to a point where I feel I need to go beyond, what I've done, and just showing kind of like the geographical, location, of my ancestry on both sides of my family.
Do you know where your mother learned her practices?
No. And I wonder, if it came through her grandmother, my grandmother's mother, because she was very close to her. And so that is the only person who I know of that my mother was very close to. And, of course, there's, my grandfather, her dad, was, I know my aunts and uncles, talk about, how he taught them how to do all of these, unusual things. But yeah, I really don't have much to go off of that. And again, these are like questions I could have, gotten answers from my mom, about. So there's just a whole lot of unknown.
Yeah, I think we're all working with those holes, and there's maybe more of them than actual knowledge for most of us. So speaking of all this, you mentioned these different myths, folk tales from your ancestral traditions that you resonate with, and you mentioned a number of them. So I'd love to hear about one or all of them, or how they are presences in your life.
Yeah. Well, let's see. So so first of all, let me just say that I mainly identify with my mother's lineage and culture. So that is, the, Mexican people. And my father's side, European, Irish, English, American, U.S. Southern folk. I don't, talk about having even less information. There's even more holes in that family tree. And we didn't grow up with like stories or traditions, even really, on that side of the family. And it was my mother's family were the ones who I was with most of the time. And that was the culture that I grew up with, the Mexican culture. So I don't identify with any other kind of any other myth, uh, history, then. Mm-hmm.
May I just interject that you very clearly look like an indigenous woman, like a Mexican woman, like you embody that in your hair, in your face, in your stance. I don't know, there's just something, it's interesting. I've noticed with a lot of people, like the lineage that we resonate with most tends to be the one that we like have the most physical gene expression through as well.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, you say that, because growing up, being, a mixed race, mixed culture person, no one ever really kind of knew what to do with me, right? Which is kind of, which is the story of mixed race folk. We're liminal, we're neither here nor there. So you're either too much of this or not enough of that. So I'm light-skinned, but no one ever has mistaken me for being white, and so I'm clearly not white, but no one ever is able to kind of like really put their finger on it. Once in a while, I will get someone who will ask if I am, Native American or if I am Latina, and they're usually Native American or, Mexican themselves. And especially when I had my long hair, wearing my hair in braids, that kind of was an indicator to people. I have since, I don't know if you've seen, the recent photo of me.
I haven't.
Oh my gosh, Amber. Yeah. I cut all my hair off, girl.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That's a whole other story. Yeah. It is like short, like all gone.
Wow.
Yeah. So, which has been really interesting, because for a while, I did this last month. I was reaching for phantom braids, so it was like, where are my braids? Yeah. So it was, so it's different. So I do intend to grow my hair back out. But so part of it was that I was trying to grow out my silvers and quit dyeing my hair. And that's a process that is fraught with, it's awful.
Yes. That's why I'm never going to start dyeing. I have plenty of silvers and I'm just going to let them be.
Yes. So terrible. So it was part of that. And then, when I had my hairdresser friend trim my hair, which was kind of a big deal because I hadn't been cutting my hair for a long time. And she took a couple inches off, and that really kind of set it into motion for me, where I was like, oh, I'm ready. I'm ready to let all of this hair go. And it was something that was, I felt I identified that hair, that long, dark hair, those braids, with the past 3 shitty relationships I've been in. Right. And also part of that was that these men, honestly kind of have a Latina fetish. And so I was really just wanting to remove that energy from my hair and start over and, just kind of, release that. And, of course there's the whole, Native American, tradition of, cutting your hair when you're, when there's a loss, when you're mourning, the death, of a loved one. And so, so it was really kind of this big transformative experience, and I'm so glad I finally did it. And but it takes people. It shocks folks when they see it, and they're like, "Oh my gosh!"
I'm looking at the photo now. It's crazy how a haircut makes such a different impression.
Yeah.
And you got a little blonde in there.
Yeah, so that was part of the blending in the silver plan, is to bring the highlights to try and eradicate some of the rest of the dye. And Yeah. So that's what's going on there. Um, but yeah, so I like to think that, it was not my braids that, made up my personification of my heritage.
Uh-huh.
You know, uh, but I think you're right. I think it is, there's something about how someone carries himself, how the intonation in their speech. Um, yeah, there's all of those things that you can really kind of like look at and say, oh, this person is clearly of this, or clearly not of that, at least. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
You've got a powerful look. Like if I didn't know you, if I saw you on the street, I'd be like, who's she? She looks cool. She looks interesting. I bet she has something to teach me.
but I bet you wouldn't walk up to me, right?
Well, I don't walk
because
up to people, so
because that's the thing. Because I have, what I call like the resting bruja face, right?
yeah. Well, you're on
So
your website, your about page. This photo of you is so fucking fabulous. I love it so. This face, yeah. I wouldn't walk up to that woman if she was looking at me like that.
yeah. And I'm always like, why does anyone want to talk to me? Yeah. But that was definitely inherited from my mother. And actually my son carries the same face and the same, experience. And, why are you mad? I'm not mad. What are you talking about? But yeah, we definitely, come from a line of warriors. And that actually ties into one of the myths, the Yaqui talking tree prophecy. My Yaqui Indian lineage is from my mother's father's family. And so those are folks who are from kind of like the northern region of, Mexico, like I had said, Sonora, Chihuahua. And so that is a tribe of folks who are known to be warriors. And they are generally considered tall for, Mexican Indians. And they really put up a hell of a fight when the Spanish came. And they fought longer and harder than, any of the other, tribes. But so the creation story of how the Yaqui people came to be is through the talking tree. And so the Yaqui weren't people yet. They weren't these, Indian warrior people yet. They were the Surim people. And I don't know if I'm even saying that right, because again, this is something that has been lost. This is a story that hasn't been passed down to me from, grandparents, or maybe it's Surim. I don't know. So that's a whole aside. So these were quiet, tiny, peaceful creatures. They didn't like loud noises. They didn't like bright lights. They just lived this very calm, existence. So essentially just this, tribe of highly sensitive people, right? Well, one day they noticed a bunch of noise coming from a tree. And I think it was I think specifically it was a palo verde tree, if I'm remembering correctly. But anyway, yeah, there was this tree. And so it sounded like it was speaking, but they couldn't understand it. And so everyone would gather around this, tree, and, they were just baffled. And then there was this one little girl who was, like telling her, her parents, I know what the tree is saying. And they, disregarded her, of course. And, she was persistent. And finally they're like, okay, but don't you shame us, And so sure enough, she went and sat with this tree, and the tree relayed this prophecy. And the tree told her of the white men that would be coming with their killing machines and with their, the railroad and all of these other, things. She was, getting all this information from this tree. And so the tree said, your people have a choice. You can stay or leave. And if you choose to leave this area, then you will, no longer be a part of this existence. And so it said that the ones that chose to stay, or rather to leave, they moved off into the ocean and deeper into the woods. So the Surim are kind of like the little people of so many other cultures. So it said that you can still speak to them, when you're at the ocean, when you're in the woods, so they are the little people. Now, the ones who chose to stay were transformed into tall warriors, and they're the Yaqui, who came from the Surim, and they are the ones who ultimately established, the Yaqui tribe and became the warriors to fight away the Spaniards, and that is the bloodline lineage that came to be. So that's that story.
That's beautiful. I love the how our people came to be stories.
Mm-hmm.
They're always so rich.
Yeah. So, and it's just, kind of interesting, to think about, our choices and how those inform our experience, and so I just have to consider that really I am from both the Surim and the Yaqui, are within me. So I hold, the magic and medicine of the little people, as well as the warrior.
That's beautiful. I love that you can carry that knowing about yourself from this ancestral story.
And, it really makes a lot of sense because when, I apply that, story to my life, my experience, that's 100%. I am a quiet, peaceful, earth and ocean connected being that speaks to that speaks to these elements of the natural world. And I definitely have warrior blood. I am a fighter. I'm an advocate, and that has been something that has been clearly demonstrated to me in my family, on my mom's side, with each generation. The different fights that, each generation has had to, go through, and my own experience. So, yeah.
I wanted to quote you from the opening episode of your podcast, Branch and Bone Medicine Show. That's the name, yes. So I loved your definition of medicine with a capital M, to distinguish it from this idea so many folks have of pharmaceuticals or even using herbs allopathically, as you say. Take this for that. So to be distinguished from that kind of medicine, you define medicine with a capital M as a deep nourishment which serves to support us in our innate ability to self-heal and heal each other, and as reciprocal, honoring connections with everything around us: plants, stones, water, earth, sky, animals, music, song, art, writing, movement, touch. And you say we all carry this medicine within us. It is both ancient and accessible. I think you nailed it, Lola.
great. I did it. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's as simple and as complex as that, Amber. Mm-hmm. So mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that I really, always try to impart, to folks I'm in conversation with, whether it's, someone I'm seeing as a client or, just any other, conversation that I'm having around, healing or herbalism or whatever, the spiritual conversation may be. Because I really am disheartened by the separation that I see happening a lot, where people feel they have to seek outside of themselves for medicine, mm-hmm. And, so that's why it's really important for me to, kind of like push that point is, we all carry that medicine within us. We all have it. We have medicine for our own healing. We have medicine for the healing of others, So, even like the term, like if someone, refers to me as a healer, yeah, I get it. It's shorthand, right? Because our language is so clumsy. So oftentimes we have to, use these labels and, it's okay, great. Now I kind of have an idea of what you do or, your particular ethos now based on this one word. But, when I see someone, if someone comes to me for whatever, kind of, assistance they're seeking, I make it clear that I am not your healer. You are your healer. I am I'm a co-facilitator here, and honestly, Amber, not everyone wants to hear that. Mm-hmm. And there's some folks who don't come back to me, because what they want is someone, when they're asking for help, sometimes what someone is really asking is for you to do it for them. Right. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes folks are not in a place, they're not ready to acknowledge their own power. And so that's why they will turn to someone who will kind of like do it for them, so to speak. Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're just so many folks in this culture are so disempowered around their mm-hmm. own health. And mm-hmm. and like you said, so many don't want to be. It's just so much easier to know, like, well, if something comes up, I'll just go to the doctor. Like, mm-hmm. why would I spend any of my time or energy learning how to heal myself?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and even not even just turning, to, Western, medicine, doctors, but, other types of, herbalist or energy workers, lots of people fall along the spectrum within, those modalities of healing, right? Mm-hmm. And how they work with people that they see. And so even within that, there are folks who will do it for you, and I see that a lot with naturopaths, right? So that to me isn't that far removed from, being a physician. Mm-hmm. The way that they prescribe all of these supplements yes. and so many blood tests and mm-hmm. it's expensive and it requires you to always go back to them. Mm-hmm. Right. Yes. And I'm like, where is you're removing these people's sovereignty. Mm-hmm. And, so great. I'm glad you're not using pharmaceuticals, but it still looks the same to me.
Mm-hmm. I've had that exact experience with naturopathic doctors, just like going to the regular doctor, but I got prescribed some very expensive supplements instead mm-hmm. of a pharmaceutical. And when I left, I was like, that wasn't healing in any way. Mm-hmm. I wasn't deeply listened to. I didn't get my whole story shared.
and it didn't help in any way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there are some brilliant naturopaths.
Oh, yeah.
But for the most part, yeah, I almost feel like it's like a meaningless category.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's such a shame, you know? But, yeah, so that's just kind of where I stand with that. I don't know how we got off on that tangent.
Yeah.
But yes.
Yeah. I've never heard anyone else say that, so I felt excited to hear you say it.
Okay.
Yeah, that, just noticing how deeply disempowered people are around their health is, I think, something that motivates a lot of us who are working in herbalism, podcasting, all sorts of the whole spectrum of modalities, as you said.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right. And that's, that is, my podcast, as you know, with your own podcast, it has its own life, and it has its own medicine that offers its own, different elements that folks can extract from it for their own journey and their process, wherever they are, with that. And, my podcast, specifically, highlighting and, amplifying the voices of people of color within, the world of herbalism and spirituality and creative arts, because they are so often the folks who are, overlooked within, these circles. And talk about, a loss. Because these are the, folks who have, oftentimes they're very connected, to this, earth medicine and, indigenous, folk medicine healing ways. And they are kind of, put aside, because their voices aren't as loud or as seen. They're not as seen, as, their people of color, counterparts.
Mm-hmm. You said that you're giving a platform for the understories.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That part of the forest, right, that is, so critical, to the ecosystem of the entire forest. And it's, it's overshadowed by, the canopy of the, the tall, obvious, trees that take up the most space, right? Mm-hmm. And, so people of color, they haven't been allowed to take up as much space, as, white folks within these same circles. And white folks who are utilizing the medicine of people of color and repackaging it and selling it as their own, all too often without reverence for where this medicine came from. So that's the disheartening part, because it's not so much about us, all not being able to share in each other's, culture and, medicines, because that's beautiful. And that's how, we develop and grow, further from, what each of us knows individually. But it's when it is being taken, that is, a problem. And that's, just another, another element of, colonialism still at play, even today. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're doing the podcast. When I first saw it, I think I stumbled upon it in iTunes. Like if you had made an announcement, I hadn't seen it, and I was like, oh, yay, Lola, and then I read the description or listened to the first episode, and I was like, yes, okay. Aww, and like, I've got to get her on my podcast to talk about this. I'm going to read your description of it. Mm-hmm. You say this podcast is intended to serve as a connection and support to those whose medicine stories often go unheard, and to be a platform dedicated to spotlighting and amplifying the underrepresented voices of multicultural people of color doing their work in the modern communities of herbalism, magic, or other healing and creative arts. These are stories shared with the intention of community building, cultivating interconnectedness, and honoring the offerings of these folks as the worthy works of resiliency and reclamation that they are.
Mm-hmm.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautifully said.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really special when any of us are reclaiming our medicine heritage, right? Women especially, but people of color even more so, because that was part of what was taken away from us, with, colonization. You remove people's religion, you remove their medicine, and who are the medicine keepers, historically? The women, right? And so that's like a direct hit. And so when we start to, damage the structure of a culture's women, then you're already great. Now you're well on your way to, weakening the entire culture. And it's been pretty effective, So when I see more and more folks, Black, Indigenous, people of color, reclaiming, reconnecting their ancestral magic and medicine, I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Because it's so, so important. As part of, for a lot of reasons, but as part of healing those ancestral traumas that, we carry. And, and I think too, maybe that's part of why, food is also so important for me, and my ancestral, foods, and why I do believe, comida es medicina, because food is medicine in all of the ways. And food is one of the things that most cultures still have been able to maintain, and kind of like pass it under the radar as I'm just eating. But when we kind of like really get into it, we really honor, our ancestral foods, we're connecting deeper than that. And we are, connecting to ancestors, and literally, our ancestors, with the plants. But it's a way of remembering, where we're from, and staying connected to our people, in that way.
And what does that look like for you in practice?
That in practice looks to me like making corn tortillas from scratch, right? That looks like to me, creating, foods and drinks that incorporate, indigenous, foods and spices, things that some of the things that my grandmother, used, that she ate, that she prepared. But beyond that, because my grandmother is still very much, she's still very much in that colonized mindset. Mm-hmm. And so, thinking about what her mother prepared, and what her mother and her mother and her mother, and, carrying that back. And so those are really important things for me to consider. And that was something that I thought of, gosh, what was it? Has it been now? Maybe two years, maybe longer, when I went gluten-free. Because that was part of my healing journey. And I was so sad that gluten was a problem when I discovered it, because I was eliminating things, and then I was eliminating gluten. I was like, oh no, that does make a good difference. Darn it, But I really started to think about, well, that's not my ancestral food. white flour is not my ancestral food. And even if we're talking on my father's side, right? I mean, wheat was really not predominant, wasn't predominant in use with, the Irish folk, so.
Well, and white flour was no one's ancestral food.
No.
That's a very recent invention.
Right. So, it was, corn, it was maize, it was amaranth. And, so I especially really like making, I make these, little chocolate treats. So it's, chocolate mixed with popped amaranth and, honey and, cinnamon or, different, whatever you want to put into it like that. And so there's these little kind of gosh, I don't know how you would liken it. I guess kind of like granola bar type ish, but these little squares, these little, candy-like squares. And this is going way back, to, Aztec, times where that would be mixed with blood of those who were being sacrificed. And it was shared with everyone. And instead of it being, put into a neat little pan, it was made into the shape of a human body. So, you have to just kind of really, think about that. Here I am, in this day and age, and I am honoring and giving reverence to my bloodline just in this very simple act of eating this traditional food. And it's a magical practice in and of itself, because it brings in so much more than just, this is a traditional food. Well, this is a traditional food with a plant and with, all of these different elements that were so revered by my long ago ancestors and how they related these foods to the gods. And here I am doing the same thing today.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. You're the third guest in a row where we've really dived into food medicine as ancestral remembrance. And I didn't plan that, it's so cool to realize how much this is rising in the collective consciousness right now. And it's very much making me, realize that it's something I should be paying more attention to as well.
Yeah, I love that. I do. I was just talking to somebody about that, recently about how, different things will pop up, and, with different people. And like you said, in the collective consciousness. And then it's kind of like, oh, wow. Okay. Let's take a look at this because this is clearly something that is, asking to be seen and, to have a little more attention, paid to it. Yeah, I love that. Oh my gosh, it's so exciting.
It is exciting because as my episode 19 guest, Darla Antwine, talked about, we're so food confused. I know I am food confused. I read so many different articles and books and diet plans, and it just leaves me like my head spinning. I'm like, well, what's right for me? What should I be doing? What's good for you? And so she pointed out that eating your ancestral foods is really an antidote to that. Right. Yeah. So one thing to kind of start closing up here, one thing that I'm really trying to do, I've realized recently with this podcast is let people know that being spiritual, or I have such a problem with that word, but you know what I mean, engaging in ritual, reconnecting with yourself, your ancestors, the earth, does not have to be this big, heavy thing. I like to say you don't have to don a caftan to to engage with the world in a bigger way. So I really love that before we spoke, I'd asked you about your dreams and any big like mystical experiences or transcendent experiences or things that have happened to you. And you said like, yes, I've had prophetic dreams and life-changing mystical experiences, but they're mundane. Right. And I was like, yes, they are mundane. They can be mundane. And so I just tell me about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, because I have heard about people who've, had these, I guess these really like major kind of, journeys, dreams, and they just kind of like woke up and they were like, oh my gosh, now I know. Now I know what I'm going to do. I know the right answer. I've got it. It's on lock. Yes. And I'm like, that's cool. I have not had that experience. What I have had and do have, I have a lot of more subtle, mundane, I guess, experiences, daydreams, dreaming, whatever that looks like, where I will just get, it's like just all this, it's a knowing, right? It's like this clear cognizance. And it's a knowing of this isn't right, or, this I'll get, so I will get like pretty specific prophetic dreams sometimes. And I will see, well, like, okay, so like, or I'll have a dream where somebody is pregnant by this man. And so then, I have had this where it's like, okay, then I talk to this woman and okay, there's this man who is trying to get you pregnant. And then what it turns out to be is he is trying to impregnate her with what he wants. And he is, actively pursuing, trying to enter into her personal space and violate her. And, so it's, it was this whole kind of like thing like that. But what I've learned also, so this also goes back to learning about folks after they have passed. So my dad's sister, the oldest sister, passed away. And I remember some conversation around this years back, but it was all brought back after she passed. And then my dad, and we all gathered to, prepare for her death. And so she would talk to our ancestors. So she would talk to grandparents who have passed. And she would have dreams, like prophetic dreams. And, so I asked my dad, I was like, so what is it like? She gets this like big revelation, this like, he's like, no, it's just like little stuff, things that don't seem like really important until, you start to like think about it and piece it together. And I'm like, oh yes, I can relate to that. And then my dad, and then he's telling me, yeah, like I dreamt that our neighbor was pregnant and she was going to have a girl. And I told her, and she said, well, I am pregnant and we haven't told anyone. And then she had a girl. And I was like, Dad, why haven't you ever like shared these things with me? And it would kind of, make it a lot easier knowing that you weren't alone and that there are people within your own family who have these same kind of experiences. And he was like, yeah, well, just don't really think it's anything special. And, and so just different things that he would start sharing with me over, more recent years. It's been really revealing and helpful. And so, yeah, the magic, mundane magic, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's important for me, I've learned to answer the call when I get these certain types of, dreams, these things that are kind of like telling me what to do, what not to do. And every time I have done that, every time I have honored that, it has been so helpful. And then oftentimes, as dreams are, you'll forget them. And if I haven't, answered the call, sometimes I'll remember, as time passes on, and then I can look back and be like, oh my gosh, I had a dream that was telling me about this thing. But I didn't respond and I forgot about it. So yeah, that's kind of how that happens with my dreams anyway.
I think, when we talk about dream work and, people often talk about writing it down when you first wake up or speaking it into your phone. And, but another way to really cultivate a relationship with your dreams is to act on them, as you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. So that has become, a greater practice of mine, in really more of like just the past, I think 3 years. And it has served me well. And I wish I'd done it sooner, So, but, and I think too, as women, that kind of like speaks to how, we're poo-pooed, for, for so many things, but we're made to feel like we're crazy or we're, whatever, we're being irrational about, something, we're overreacting. And so that really kind of like detaches us from our innate ability to connect with what's outside of just our own mental space,
Right. To connect with our own inner guidance. Just you bringing up women being labeled as irrational. I've really been thinking about that lately and really being like, what the fuck? Like, seriously, most men that I know are more irrational than the women that I know. And if you look back at like history and patriarchy, like war is the most irrational thing I can possibly imagine. And, I'm just, I'm feeling the fire in my blood right now as I talk about this, like women being called irrational because we're intuitive, because we have emotional responses to things, because we call out injustice and, oppression and just all manner of things when we see it. That's not irrational. And really, the more I think about like the behavior of men under patriarchy, last few thousand years, the more I see that is much more irrational behavior.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it absolutely is. And, and if I had, when I don't honor, my knowing, my claircognizance, it always winds up, poorly. And I could have, really saved myself, some crappy relationship issues if I had just, honored that. So I think too, that's what happens is we often, can get a really clear picture of, things beyond our immediate, circle. But when it comes to like our most intimate one-on-one relationships, it's kind of, things get a little blurry, and so that's where, problems, arise when we don't honor those same knowings that we have, little further out at arm's reach and beyond, and apply that to things that are, much closer to us. Right. So, yeah.
So there again, just sharing, teaching, spreading wisdom more throughout the culture so that we can maybe in some ideal future all be holding the same wisdom, the same ideals, the same, be able to reflect those things back to our brothers and sisters when they're hurting and they can't see what's right in front of them or what's going on in their lives.
Right. Right. And I think I see that, you saying that, and I'm hopeful A lot of what I see is starting to happen now where, white women in particular are starting to take ownership for their own, part in white supremacy. And so really like hard conversations are being had, and it's unpleasant for, a lot of folks. And, but I think just like what you were saying, sharing this and spreading it, further is going to, benefit, everyone. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a slow kind of like coming to, that you can recognize, these awful, horrible things within our society, and we can make a change, and part of that has to do with just acknowledging it.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking as a 100% European white woman, we are being schooled right now, and I'm really glad.
Yeah. Yeah. And really, really grateful for, because it is white folks' work, to, step into the front lines and start dismantling, mm-hmm. What has been built up, all of these years, and placing yourself in between, the Black, Indigenous people of color and, the white supremacy, the patriarchy, and, all of that. So I really, really, really am grateful for the folks that I see who are, doing that. And, and sometimes that doesn't look like a really big bombastic, statement, or, activism takes on all kinds of different, looks. And I think, people can kind of get confused by that. But, the micro is just as important than, the work that people are doing on the macro level, or that people are seeing on the macro level, let's say, mm-hmm. right? Because where are you individually going to make the biggest impact? Within your immediate circles, within your family, under your own roof, right? So that's where, that shift is going to start occurring and rippling out. Yeah.
Such a good point, Lola. Yeah. Yeah. So we need to wind up so I can get back to my nursling, but please, thank you so much for this conversation, and so much to really take in to my cells after this. I really look forward to going back and listening to it and writing out my notes, and please tell people where they can find you.
People can find me. My main website is lolavenado.com. That's Venado. And I am also on Instagram at Lola Venado. And then Branch and Bone is kind of the umbrella under which my botanical products, which I occasionally offer online, but they're usually just kind of like reserved for people in my immediate community. So you don't see a lot of that online anymore. But that is where the podcast is housed as well. So on Instagram, it's Branch and Bone. And then the website for the all of the podcast episodes, that is housed at branchandbonemedicine.show.
Good to know. Thank you, Lola.
Thank you so much, Amber. Really appreciated you having me.
Thank you for taking these medicine stories in. I hope they inspire you to keep walking the mythic path of your own unfolding self. I love sharing information and will always put any relevant links in the show notes. You can find my blog, handmade herbal medicines, and a lot more at mythicmedicine.love. While you're there, be sure to click the black banner across the top of the page to take my quiz, Which Magical Herb is Your Spirit Plant? It's a fun and lighthearted quiz, but the results are really in-depth and designed to bring you into closer alignment with the medicine that you're in need of. If you love the show, please consider supporting my work at patreon.com/medicine stories. There's some cool rewards there, like exclusive content, free access to my Herbal ebook and online course, and the ability to chat with me. I am a crazy, busy, and overwhelmed mom, and adding another project into my life with this podcast is a questionable move. But I'm also so excited about it and just praying that the Patreon will allow me the financial wiggle room to keep doing it. Another way that you can support, if that's not an option, is to head over to iTunes and subscribe and review the podcast. That would be super helpful. Thank you. And thank you to Marie Sue for providing the music that I use. That's Marie with 2 E's, Sioux. This is from her song Wild Eyes, one of my favorites. Check out Marie Sue. Beautiful music. Thank you, and I look forward to next time. Bye.